Welcome to Acclime Conversations, where we talk to the people that matter in business in Vietnam. Today, my guest is Christina Ameln. Welcome to the show. Your role is Sustainability Strategist and Advisor, and you've got a bit of an interesting story to coming to Vietnam, and you've got an interesting story about what you do, and I'm loving to hear this, and look, welcome and great to talk to you, Christina.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for having me in this conversation and this lovely, amazing, and interesting topic of sustainability. So I look forward to sharing some of my background and viewpoints and hope this is helpful to you and the audience.
Fantastic. So before we go into sustainability per se and what it means to Vietnam in particular, you've been working around the globe. You've worked, I've got some notes here, you've worked in New York, London, Stockholm, Singapore, and probably a few others that I've missed out sitting in there. But you've been here about 10 years. What's the journey? What brought you to Vietnam? What's the background that got you into where you are today? And it's the story that I find most interesting in the people we interview, because that sort of sets the scene for the value in Vietnam and what you're trying to achieve. So tell us a bit about the story.
Well, let me start off. I'm part Asian, part European. And a couple of years ago, my husband and I decided that we still wanted to continue that adventurous spirit in us, and decided that we would go and explore Asia. And it wasn't at first obvious that it would be Vietnam. We came and with our two younger kids and went to Thailand, went to Laos, and ended up in Vietnam.
Okay.
And when we arrived here, we really felt the energy of Vietnam. It's both scary and very exciting.
Absolutely.
So I will want to highlight the combination of the two. And why we ended up here is that we really felt the energy of the country. It's in the air, of the people around us, and also the projects and the endeavors that are here as well. And really just felt that it suited where we were at that point in our life. And funny enough, we're still here so many years later.
So the journey just stuck at Vietnam was the sticking point that worked for you?
Absolutely.
So what is your professional background, sort of, as we'll go into a sustainability and the greater picture that means, what is your qualifications and what led you into that as that sort of that passion and career that you're working with?
Well, that's a great question. It's one of those things that I do reflect back on, because I think one always starts off thinking you're going to do a linear journey in your career, and it's not linear. It's very much a non-linear journey. But I really value that journey in the fact that the diversity of it has brought me here to Vietnam today. So in actual fact, I started off being a bit of a rebel, if one can say that, and rebellious against my parents. My parents worked in the United Nations, and I was very set that I was not going to have anything to do with anything they had done previously, because I think as any child, you just want to set out and set your own path. So I actually studied business. And after my studies, I went into communications in public relations and marketing. So nothing to do with anything on social, on environmental, or any sustainable impact. But after a while, this wording kept popping up, and that was the word corporate social responsibility. And I felt very drawn to it, seeing how you cannot escape what you've been exposed to growing up, and also combining my interest in business. So following my communications, I actually stepped into a role in a not-for-profit environment in the United States, where we worked with a network of leading companies on how they could engage with their unique business skills on health issues, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria.
It's a big change from sort of what you were doing, a big jump you took there.
A big jump, but one of the things I would say, communications is still a red thread throughout my whole career. If you can't explain what you're doing, you're pretty much doing it on your own. So after that time and stint at the not-for-profit with this network of corporates, I actually jumped in and transitioned into a corporate role or corporate environment in which I worked for a leading Swedish company on hygiene and forestry, where I was director of corporate social responsibility. And one of those key learnings there is how to really understand how a company works.
Non-profit's very different to a corporate enterprise. And,
exactly, and that there are different types of companies as well. And knowing how they work also ensures that you're able to engage with their model to potentially talk about social and environmental issues, but you need to understand how a company works as well. So very interesting time. After a while, I really decided to continue, that adventurous spirit and step into a consulting role. And in that consulting role was really to continue that learning that when you talk about sustainability, and I view sustainability under 3 pillars of environmental, social, and governance together, interconnected together, that there are so many learnings out there and different ways of working. So continuing that adventure, I've been consulting the last couple of years with not-for-profits, with corporates, and other sectors and entities to really continue that passion of learning, but also making that positive impact on sustainability.
And you mentioned there sort of how you break into 3 pillars, and we see that we've got ESG, we've got CSR, we've got sustainability in a general context, we've got trying to look for impact, environmental impact and people impacts and social, doing things for the right reason. A lot of terminology, a lot of things are thrown around. What's behind that? What does it actually mean? You've got 3 pillars. How do we put that in a context of doing the right thing? And what does it mean? Because we do see a lot of catchwords, buzzwords thrown out and new ones getting created. How do we keep control of it? What does it mean?
Thank you for that question, because I would say the biggest headache is all these words out there. I mean, there are so many words out there, from corporate social responsibility, which I started out with over 20 years ago.
Which was the catchword in the past.
Yes,
yep.
To shared value, to then sustainability, and the new word now is ESG.
Oh, I've seen recently impact officers and a whole lot of other things.
So many different things.
Around.
I think with it, it is important to understand those definitions for sure. Each definition might be aligned to a different sector. So knowing the differences is also being able to create the connections. So one of the words that has been popping up a lot recently is the word ESG, and this has been driven a lot by investors. Yep. Another word that you hear a lot is corporate social responsibility, or CSR. This is often driven in the work with the community or not-for-profits.
So one's more of an internally driven, one's a top-down driven.
Exactly. So many drivers. Another is, for example, shared value, or even just sustainability. So you hear that a lot, the sustainability strategy in a corporate. So going back to your question, 1, yes, so many words out there. Take the time to understand them and define them for yourself. 2, with understanding the definitions, that's when you create the connections. And connections between different sectors, different people, different ways of working. And then 3, I would say it really builds into the work I do with Purple Ivy. So I have 3 roles, or 3 hats. I work as with a Swedish sustainability management consultancy. Gosh, that's a mouthful.
I'll make a note of that.
Yeah. Even I was like stuttering across that. But Purple Ivy works with corporates on how to integrate sustainability deeper into their business models. And with that, how does that look? That looks that when you build a strategy in your organization with sustainability, there are a number of steps to take before you say, this is how we're going to do it.
If you're part of the core values, you need to really sort of make it part of the organization.
Make it part of the organization. So one of the things I would say, there are multiple steps that you should follow before you set those goals and alignment. And one is really, if you talk about the sustainability framework for an organization, is, as I said, understand the definitions, define the ones you want to use. But first, the first step is that intention. Think and plan. Think and plan that you want to have sustainability as part of your organization.
Almost the why.
Yes. 2 and 3. Step 2 would be to really identify what is material to you. I think there's this big expectation that you have to work on everything in sustainability. But for organizations, what is relevant for you in Europe might not be relevant for you in Asia. And when you've identified what is material to your organization, prioritize the ones that you want to work on. And with this prioritization, I would also say bring in the experts. So bring in the experts in the same way as you would bring in experts if you have you need support around human resources, or in the same way people bring in you as an expert at Acclime to work and support them in the work. Same thing in sustainability. After you've done step 1, think and plan. 2, identify. 3, prioritize. Make sure that you also have a process of measuring that work you're going to do on sustainability. I think many people talk about the saying that what you measure, you manage. And that's a very important part of the process.
Because we see sometimes boards who are new to sort of the ESG responsibilities being sort of forced down upon them from above, going, oh, we're doing lots of things. How are we reporting? How we measure? It's sort of, it misses the mark. It's more of we have to do it. Now, what do we report? They haven't followed the steps. They haven't followed. They've been doing it because they're told to, instead of having this structure in place.
Yeah.
So that's one of the roles you take, is to make sure the process, there is a process and an expert to guide them through that process.
Absolutely. And the final 2 steps I would like to add, when you've done that initial, is that when you have looked at what you want to prioritize, looked what you can measure, that's when you can decide this is how we're going to align our goals, this is how we're going to integrate it into our organization, this is how you create your North Star. And the final point is really to engage, collaborate and motivate your stakeholders internally and externally around that North Star.
And then it becomes, to use that buzzword, a sustainable process at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would like to add to that point is that the process of this framework is not static. It's not you do it once and it stops there.
Checklist, file, sign, put it away. It doesn't work like that.
No, this is an ongoing process. You do it once. You might decide, oh, we have to check in again in a year or 2, because as any organization, it's fluid. You might have divested something that changes your model and your materiality and your prioritization, or you might have acquired a new business that then will have an impact to your goals and alignment.
That's a good point. I saw one of our clients was many years ago trying to change in their industry poly bags and get rid of the plastics and change that opportunity. Now that's just normal part of the business, all their clients, everything else. They've switched to other things being priorities because that's no longer an impact that they have to focus on. They've already achieved that. And you see that happening in business. What are the other 2 roles? You mentioned you've got 3 roles. So you've got Purple Ivy. What are the other 2 roles that you have?
Oh, that's great. I should have come to that. This is the code. Thank goodness you're here to guide me on what I do. So the great thing of wearing 3 hats. So one is that consultancy to corporates on integrating sustainability deeper into business models. The other role I have is working with AVPN, which is headquartered out of Singapore. And this is a network organization of social investors. And it's the largest network in Asia with 600 members in 33 markets. And this is really about how you can invest into social and environmental impacts for positive impacts. Mm-hmm. And then my last hat is a blog platform in which I invite writers or experts in sustainability, partnerships and impact to write about these topics in Vietnam from their viewpoint.
Fantastic. So talking and focusing on Vietnam, a very broad picture we see, and I see it in my position in business, is the value of sustainability to businesses. Businesses, as a general rule, are more profitable and have a more sustainable business model where they focus on environmental sustainability, ESG type matters. That's the feeling we have. Is that fact? Is that evidenced that it is better for business by focusing on this and having that as part of their tenets, their governance, their core values?
If I take a step back to that conversation, that question, and integrate it into our conversation, is that sustainability, the definition, has 3 pillars underneath it, and that's environment, social, and governance. And if you talk about it, it's environment. It's what the word says. It all. It's about how you are impacting the environment and how potentially the environment will impact you as a business.
By the way, it was a loaded question. I know that.
Yeah. So, and then the next pillar is social. So that, if you're an organization or a business, is how you work in the workplace, how you work with your employees, and how you set them up to succeed. It also has the other side, is how do you work in the community? How are you a good corporate citizen and also impact not only inside your walls, but outside your walls with the people around you. And finally, the governance part, it is what, if, for example, you have a code of conduct in place, how do you deal with corruption? What are your ethics review processes? So I say sustainability with these three pillars, they're all interconnected. So that's an important part. Why is it important for a business? Well, yes, often businesses will pursue this role of prosperity. But now prosperity is not just economic prosperity, it's very much embedding the social and governance part as well. And why is this? I would say, let me answer with the viewpoint of investors. So there's been a huge trend that investors are really looking at all three pillars. So when they're putting their money into a company, for example, they want the return on investment, not only on economic terms, but also on the two other parts.
Correct. And we see it's an interesting challenge that we have in business where we have an anti-bribery, we've got conduct laws in our standard engagement letters, and clients want to interpose theirs. And sometimes we see them as watering down, and we're actually pushing back to say that's not part of our values. We want to make sure that we don't water down what we do, because it's part of your core values. And it's an interesting commercial trying to go through and keep that balance and watch what others are doing at the same time and how to integrate. It's really because everyone does that slightly different. They see they're different, what they need to give back to the community, what they need for their staff, and it's an interesting challenge. How you'd mentioned investors. How much has the environment changed about social elements, sustainable elements, etc., being part of the investment driver? So, your social investment funds that are socially driven investment funds, how have they changed the landscape? Is it a dominant element to now the investment decisions funds are making, or is it more of a narrow niche part? Expanding, but is it still sort of that niche area of sort of the bigger investment landscape?
Investors and the trend on ESG, so going back to the definitions, ESG has very much been driven by investors, the wording ESG. And what it is very much is investors are looking at, are you prepared to meet the challenges of tomorrow? And the challenges of tomorrow are not only the economic challenges, but also the environmental and social challenges.
Absolutely.
So that's really the trend, and what it's being driven by is that, are you as a business prepared for not just the short term, but the long term impacts? And that's really a huge trend forward, which is amazing. But even if we talk specifically about investors, we also want that trend not to be a trend, but also a way of doing investor business. It has to be integrated. So
is it?
Yes and no. So I think the trend has been really, really fast, which means that there's been maybe certain steps that have been overlooked along the way. So one of the feedbacks from last year was the concept of ESG washing, very much similar to greenwashing. An example was Deutsche Bank got smacked on their fingers last year for fraudulently advertising their sustainability funds. So that is, of course, a problem and a challenge, and I think many of the investors are really looking again at their ESG funds to make sure that they're robust. But let's not take away the negative part of it. What the trend has really focused is that it has really pushed the needle for businesses to really engage on sustainability, because one, they will not get the money if they're not prepared. And two, they just have to be prepared to have that long-term thinking down the line.
They're limiting from the start potential investors before they do anything else. So following on from those questions, another topic, and I've seen written about, is investing for impact. What does that mean? What's an impact investor?
Yeah, so we have different types of investors that come into Vietnam. We either have the traditional like private equity investor, we have maybe a corporate investor, for example, they're investing into building something in Vietnam in the same, like a manufacturing site, etc. A growing niche of investors are called impact investors. And impact investors throughout Asia and in Vietnam is where they are not only looking at the return of investment in economic terms, they're also looking the return on impact.
So still a return being measured,
Yes.
it's a different return measure.
But impact is a priority in terms of the return. And that's going to be very interesting to see how that will create that change in Vietnam and across Asia.
Are they longer term, the outlook's longer term for
Absolutely.
those? Yeah.
And the challenge again, of course, is measurement. But measurement is a challenge across the board in sustainability and in every other themes or topics. But the thinking behind it is that we are able to have a return economically, but we can also create that impact positively in the topics we're interested, whether it's gender, in healthcare, et cetera, et cetera.
And I suppose one of the benefits is that they'll accept a lower return financially in the short term to achieve longer goals. Therefore, in some ways, it's lower cost capital from a short-term financial return perspective. So,
it'll be very interesting to see how that continues to grow here in Vietnam.
and we've seen that in energy. We've seen quite a bit going into energy. So is that money flowing in quite considerably now, or is it just a trickle at this stage?
I believe if it can continue to show that return on impact and return on investment, we will see more of it.
So we see a lot of foreign stock exchanges put requirements, and there's ESG reporting requirements. A lot of that's happening globally. Where are we in Vietnam? Where's the landscape for compulsion to do this because it's regulatory sort of implied or required versus the responsibility and the community to actually go out and do this? And I'm not talking just ESG, but the broader sense. Where's Vietnam in that picture? Are we well behind? Are we on track with our comparable countries?
I think we can talk about a carrot and stick approach. So there will be a number of businesses here that will have pushed the envelope and will be more ready than others, while there are other companies that have had to really step in front of the stick to get moving on these topics. So I think we have a balance right now that both the stick and the carrot approach is working, and more businesses are really looking at incorporating sustainability into their business.
Are we doing enough from a regulatory point of view? Is there enough stick as well? Is there enough of that?
I think it's a work in progress.
Okay.
So in any markets, there's always going to be a transition, one where you set the ambitions, and the next part where the work is being done.
So another question that really is probably, for me, it's a harder one to grasp, is what makes a company truly sustainable? What makes an organisation, say, truly sustainable? I see that as a very broad and a hard question. Where do you start? What's the answer?
I would say a truly sustainable business is one that incorporates economic with environmental and social impacts. I would say as well that it takes the short-term and long-term view.
So it has a balance.
Yeah, so not only short-term, but also the long-term view. It also takes the time to see as a business, what is its impact outside, so in and out. So what are your products and services and how are you going about it, and what's your impact out? But also, what's your impact in? What's the environment around you, and how will it impact your business? And again, as I have said, is the intention. Create that intention to be sustainable.
You mentioned earlier measurement. And
Yes.
you've got it, because there's lots of internal and external. And if you can't measure, do you know what's happening?
Exactly.
And is there a common approach to understanding, and rewarding a sustainable business, a measurement, a checklist, a certification? Are they available readily in market?
There are so many guidelines out there that can be a little bit overwhelming. I fully understand that sometimes companies are just like, which one do I choose? But, still with pride. There are many corporates outside that have a very similar business model. So if you're a Vietnamese business and you have a specific industry, there are many other companies outside of Vietnam that have taken the sustainability journey. So still, I always say, still with pride in sustainability, learn from their journey, pick and choose, and you can leapfrog your sustainability journey to greater impact faster.
And using experts, don't just rely upon your own
Yes.
your own guesswork in many cases.
Yes, there are many people out there that can absolutely advise you on your journey, and do use them.
Yep. And they're not always at a cost. Some of them, there's volunteers, there's a whole range of those resources out there. To change topic just slightly, there was a recent article, a discussion had in VIR looking at gender equality and women in the workplace, and Vietnam actually has a high representation of women in senior positions relative to other countries, not necessarily high by itself. How does that change things in Vietnam, and is that something that we need to keep working at? Is that something where should we go great, where Vietnam's doing quite well and sort of wave the flag and be proud of? Where are we at? Do we need to keep focusing on the gender equality in Vietnam, or can we back off and say we're doing a pretty good job?
Well, I think we can start off by waving the flag.
We can?
We can absolutely, in terms that there is a high percentage of women in the workforce. I think we can really wave the flag, and that's amazing in terms of other markets, for sure. But as someone put it to me, why stop there? And why stop there? There's still challenges for women in the workplace in terms of, for example, just management level positions for them. One of our AVPN members, Ward Haven Capital, did a research here in Vietnam in which they looked at women in senior management positions in publicly listed companies. One, the challenge they had was that this data was not readily available. And two, they were very disappointed to say that it was actually on the lower end. It's a miss.
So the few high-profile ones don't represent the bulk of what we actually see.
Exactly, and it's really a missed opportunity. What it is, as someone else put it, it's a leaky pipeline. So why would you miss an opportunity to have talent follow you throughout the echelons of your company all the way to the top? Another part I would like to highlight is also in the work I do with AVPN, where gender is one of the focus, but focus on gender lens investing. So when we talk about women entrepreneurs, the biggest challenge they have is access to capital, access to networks. So this is one of the challenges that ensures that it's really difficult and challenging for them to move their businesses forward. So if I turn the question back to you, how many times have you been in a room around a business topic and the majority of the people in the room are men?
The vast majority, and it's interesting where a business like mine is 85% female workforce, all the department heads are female. That's not normal, and it's a lot of time making sure that they don't feel they've gone, we're out of our comfort zone, all our compatriots and other businesses are male. It's an interesting sort of discussion trying to break down the expectations in Vietnamese society. So I asked that question regarding gender equality because it is something where the matriarchal versus patriarchal elements of society, there is still reluctance in the workforce to change that history and change because of social reasons. So how do we educate? What is the process in Vietnam? Is it an education? Is it just time? Are we getting there to change that gender expectations and that sort of male-female roles in society in Vietnam? Where in Western countries, a lot of that's broken down. Doesn't say the workforce is fixed, but a lot of those things are broken down. We haven't broken down society expectations in Vietnam yet.
No, I will take that back and maybe focus in the workforce, because I think that is something that, in the same way you put a sustainability framework together, you have to start with the intention as well. So have the intention as a business to ensure that the women in your workforce have the same platforms to grow up the echelons of your business. It might look a little bit different than how you present it to men, for sure, but have the intention. So in the same way as you build a sustainability framework, or if you're going under the sustainability framework, because it falls on the S part, because that's part of your workforce, build that in, that intention. The other side of it, the feedback back is like, oh, this is so painful, and oh no, do we have to do it? Turn it around as an opportunity. This is an opportunity for talent. It's an opportunity of a workforce that really can give back to your organization. And the other side is also a gender that has a capacity to purchase your services and products. So actually make sure that those voices are heard in the process. Absolutely,
and it's not a negative, it's absolute positive, and it can be so much more positive done in the right way, as in beneficial to a business. So if we're looking at some of the other topics there and sort of touching on this is greenwashing. What sort of the extent greenwashing in a very broad, be it gender related, be it ESG, CSR, is Vietnam sort of known for greenwashing? Is it something that everyone talks about things in the public but they don't do things behind the scenes? Is there a lot of that happening here? And is the media sort of part of the problem?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I don't think I'll answer it in that way. I think I will answer it in a different...
I could do more loaded questions if you want. No, continue.
I think I'll answer it in a different way. I think if you're going to really look at a company to see if they are really strong on sustainability, of course, one is that they have the intention, but then it has to be supported by action and robust processes. So often you can look at companies very easily, scratch the surface, and you will really see if what they're communicating is really true. So it goes back to...
How do we scratch the surface? How do we actually know? Vietnam's, it's a very opaque environment to get accurate data. How do you scratch as well?
And that's a challenge. Data is definitely a challenge. But then scratch the surface. Again, is it only communications, but is their action in place? Are they acting on their intention? Again, is there robust processes? Do they have good reporting systems around sustainability? Is there a good workplace culture? I think workplace culture is a very interesting one because often you don't need data to know if a company has a good workplace culture. A lot of a lot of people discuss it, pro and cons, etc. So all these things are in place, but there is just ask the question. Okay, you're communicating it. What are your actions and processes to support this intention?
Because we see, and this isn't Vietnam specific, we see people make claims of 1% of our funds going to planting trees or whatever. Where are the trees?
Support it with the data.
Show us. Oh, don't worry about that. Well, yes, it's important. What are the biggest challenges in getting people behind this when you're going and trying to educate?
Yes.
And I'm thinking more of the Vietnamese businesses, the traditional, the backbone of Vietnamese society is private business. How do you get them? What are the challenges? What do you need to do to get them to just open to the idea? And given where they've come from, a lot of them sort of just let me do my thing. What's your biggest challenge or challenges?
I'd say two challenges that come like straight away. One is that sustainability is a Western word. It's not an Asian concept. And two, that, oh my goodness, it's a cost. So if we tackle the first one, that it's a Western concept and not an Asian, or it's not Asian enough or Vietnamese enough, let me go back to the sustainability framework on how to integrate it into your business models. Own it. So every sustainability framework will be different, whatever the industry or company or region you're in, but the process is still the same. But own it so it belongs to you, your wording, your way of working. But do have the intention, do identify, do prioritize, do create your North Star, and then collaborate and engage to ensure that it is very aligned to how you do business here in Vietnam.
Which is a second point. It's a cost. That's the other perception and challenge. So how do you deal with that one?
Well, in the same way as a cost, you would have a cost, or you would still invest in your company. So that's a cost. If you're going to invest in your workforce, that's a cost. If you're going to invest in a new database, that's a cost. So instead of seeing it as a cost, see it as an investment in your long-term engagement and long-term business. So sustainability becomes that part of your investment portfolio in yourself.
And it's going to be a challenge. A lot of businesses see that as the investment is a relatively short term. They need a short term return, and that is going to be difficult to convince them the long term benefits when they've got a short term mentality.
Absolutely. So the struggle will always be short term versus long term. It doesn't matter if it's sustainability or any other topic, for sure. But I think the third challenge I would really like to highlight is really where we are right now. There are market difficulties right now, but whether it's outside Vietnam, manufacturing is struggling as well in Vietnam. And of course, the short term will be on survival, for sure. But in your survival mode, it's also an opportunity is that if we can survive this, how are we going to be when everything lands? Where do we want to be? So be prepared for not just what's going to happen now, but be prepared to meet what's going to happen down the line.
And is this a generational, of significant generational difference? Does the younger generation that are involved with business run with a passion, and the older generation sort of don't have that buy-in? Is that where we're seeing it in Vietnam generally?
Yes, youth is by far the segment most engaged on sustainability. Well, I can understand them. They want to be in an environment in which social and environmental viewpoints around them or the landscape around them is not destroyed, and that their parents or aunts and uncles, or now I feel like I sound like very old, but our generation haven't left it so that they have to pick up the pieces of our negative impact. So youth are absolutely the drivers here in Vietnam, but also in other markets as well.
And is that also on the investment side, or is that sort of a different scenario? It's more of the deliveries is the generational difference.
What do you mean?
So the investors, quite often investors are older, mature, they've got money, they're controlling funds. That's not a generational thing, though. That's a financial return in some ways.
So again, if put simply, if I'm going to loan you money, I would like to loan to a person that will also be able to give back, or give back even more. It's simply put. So if you take it in the term of investors, whether older generation or younger generation, it's still that I'm giving you money. Are you prepared to meet the challenges of today, which is economic, social, and environment included? If you're not prepared, it makes it really hard for me to give you that money.
Exactly. So with talking back on the investors and money coming in and Vietnam, who's driving the change here? Is it those investors coming in? Is it foreign investors pushing for change? Is there a local groundswell that's doing it? Is there a balance? Where's the sort of the influence coming across that broad sustainability context?
I think it's twofold. I think, actually I'm really quite in awe of Vietnam and its ambitions. So of course, if we go back, and I talk a lot now about the sustainability framework, the first step is think and plan, have that intention. And Prime Minister Chin communicated that intention at COP26, in which Vietnam would have a very strong ambitions to meet the net zero goals of 2050. So that is very clear. Of course, there are going to be naysayers and critics because, put bluntly, change is messy. Mm-hmm. Yep. So change is messy. That means also transition to those goals will also be messy. So it's not like in any career we're hoping for that linear approach. It is going to be here and there, and the journey towards those goals will look a little bit different because it involves so many different stakeholders. But if we continue on that conversation, and actually they've set that thinking, that ambition, that intention. They've already in part jumped to the last part, which is collaboration, engagement, and motivation. So at the end of 2022, Vietnam has entered in partnership with the EU, the UK, and many other countries to have a just energy transition partnership in which public and private financing of 15.5 billion will help Vietnam meet their green energy or green economy goals. So if you move the framework from a business to a Vietnam, they're actually really doing what they're saying. But
at a high level, macro level, there's push coming domestically.
Absolutely. So one of them is absolutely domestic. I think the frustration is that we all want it to happen faster.
Anywhere in the world, by the way.
Yeah, we want it to happen now. So all the frustrations that are coming out and all the critics or all the conversations, like how can we move this faster? The other driver is absolutely investors, whether it's investors in terms of private equity, impact investors, or even corporate investors. So let me do an example of Lego. That's a corporate investor that has come in to Vietnam.
They're $1 billion project, one of the sort of largest investments last year that was announced, and things are underway. It's a great story, yeah.
It's a great story. So I was lucky enough to be at the ground break-in ceremony, and one of the things they really communicated was, one, they're building a factory that will be carbon neutral. So that's a very ambitious leadership in terms of that manufacturing space. It's really showcasing how it can be possible. In terms of that, they're also having a strong agenda on how to engage with the community as well. So it's both the environmental and the social. And one of the reasons that was communicated why they chose Vietnam was then that green ambition, was that ambition on renewable energy.
The stated public goals.
Exactly. So the drivers are both sides, and I think that's important because you don't work in silos. Everything works together. One helps the other move the other. It's baby steps, sometimes forward.
And the reason I ask that, that's a great example, is Vietnamese economy is around 25% foreign invested, but around 76, 78% of exports are from the foreign sector. So there's a lot, and the Vietnamese export growth has been a driver of GDPs, and that's why Vietnam's committed to all these free trade agreements. There's a linkage there, and it seems to be working. And whether the foreign investors have enough say, they're bringing enough things to the table for that long-term goals, that long-term sustainability, and is there more we can do? And I talk we as in Western countries, is there more we can bring to Vietnam, or is the balance there at the moment? You know, don't push too much, things are going along. So where does that landscape sit in there? Is there more the foreign investors can do given what they have on the table with Vietnam and the ability to influence?
You know, we talk about foreign investors. They have their requirements back home. They have their regulations they have to meet, and they have to adhere to stronger, potentially, sustainability reporting or even stronger checklists. So,
just that historically, that was not necessary. Asia was a place you could ignore those rules and just do things differently. So that's not the case now.
It's moving towards that. It's throughout your value chain. So it doesn't stop in the border of Europe. It's also how does it move to where you actually working in or sourcing from. So we talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 in manufacturing. Scope 1 is what are your impacts in your business, and scope 2 and 3 will be those that are beyond your boundaries as a corporate or your legal entities, but it is very much about who are you working with.
Controllable responsibility, not operational as part of your structure.
I don't see this changing so much. I think it'll be very different. I think the biggest thing is that it will be who you're going to work with. So if you're in Vietnam, you're partnering with someone in Europe and the States, there will be definitely those type of guidelines, sustainability guidelines that you'll have to adhere. The challenge will be
the inspections and the certifications with respect to those that have to be there in place.
Exactly. The challenge, I think, will be if your partner is in Asia, so you maybe don't have that same level of scrutiny that you would have with other types of markets.
And so I see the successful local businesses are the ones, this is my view, are the ones who grab and say, we're part of the international community, what do you need? And they're not scared of the assessment process, that sort of thing. They get the work. And we're seeing that at the moment in this sort of economic downturn globally where the orders are down in some sectors. The ones that are succeeding are the ones who are take those international values as part of their business. So, what's next for Vietnam? And where are you going to put your focus in the near future? What do you see as sort of the where you have to put time and effort as lots of different hats, lots of things you're doing? Where do you see that, Christina?
Well, I I would like to put forth a data that OECD has put in, and that is there is a 2.5 trillion financing gap to meet the United Nations Sustainable Goals.
Energy goals?
No, just
sustainable. Okay.
United Nations Sustainable Goals. And since the pandemic, there's an additional 1 trillion added to that sum, which means that we're behind, whether we're in Vietnam or any other markets. And with that number, it's such a big number that it's really hard to grasp or fathom. What it really showcases is all hands on deck. So whether you are working in a business, whether you're working in the not-for-profit or whether you're working in government, it is really all hands on deck to meet these social and environmental challenges that are here in Vietnam and elsewhere. So what is the future on sustainability in Vietnam? I think we just have no choice. We have to find a way to ensure that it's integrated in the way we're doing it.
Keep pushing
Yes.
and keep making focus. So no one particular thing, it's just a matter of whatever you can, keep pushing forward to meet those goals.
Yes, and whether you want to do a carrot or a stick approach or stick or carrot approach, whatever way you want to do it, it's not going to go away. So either you are prepared and take that leadership role to meet these challenges, or you're going to be pushed into it.
One final question. What if you were sort of setting up a business now, if you're setting up and heading a business, what would be the main thing or the one thing that you would look at doing to make, before, as you were starting a business plan, what was the first thing you'd look at when it comes to sustainability? Where do you start in a brand new business before you get going? Use the example before of Lego. What would you be looking at?
I think it goes back to the three words again: prosperity, planet, and people. So when you're starting a business or you're even entering a new market, not only looking at the economic returns, but also looking at the social and environmental returns embedded in that process. So I think right now, this is an opportunity to, if you're at the very beginning, to incorporate all three aspects and not have it as a standalone.
Interesting. Okay. Well, Christina, thank you so much for coming today. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I've learnt a lot and a lot more that I need to do and continue. It's a lot here, so great, and I look forward to talking to you again. And for everyone watching and listening, fantastic. Thank you for joining us on Acclime Conversations. I look forward to joining you next time.